Okay, welcome everyone to our Zowe office hours designed to focus on Zowe V3 for Zowe users. We call them consumers as well. I'm Rosie Catch, Zowe Onboarding Squad Lead, and I'm just here to kick off the session, turn it over to Billy and Adam, Squad Leads, who will walk you through the rest of the materials. But first, just a quick reminder, if you are a Zowe extender and you missed the office hours series focused on extenders, please visit zowe.org/vnext, and you will find the recordings for that series on that page. We had probably 6 or 7 sessions just for extenders. This office hours series will focus on specific components, all the Zowe core components actually, to ensure that we offer all Zowe consumers, whether you're an installer or an admin or a user or even a vendor, a deeper understanding of V3. So if you could go to the next slide. General information over what we've got planned. Again, the series is every Friday, bright and early at 8 a.m. for those of us in the U.S. Same meeting link, regardless of what day you join. And as you can see, this is our 3rd session. We're focusing on the Zowe Explorer for Visual Studio Code. Next week, we will focus on the Zowe Explorer for IntelliJ. And then you can see the remaining subject that we'll be focusing in on over the coming weeks. So just to make you aware and help you to contribute, these are meant to be interactive. We do ask that if you have questions or concerns or comments, just go ahead and raise those in the chat. We will address those once the speakers conclude the session. We try to keep them focused on the topic that we're featuring. So today it would be, Zowe Explorer for VS Code questions. However, once we answer those, you can ask any question that you like. Finally, please reference zowe.org. vNext will continue to update that page with relevant information as we move closer to our planned GA date, which is March 28th, 2024. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Okay, the agenda for today and for all the sessions actually is we'll give you an overview of the release timeline, what's happening with V1, V2, V3, et cetera. And then Billy and Adam will walk you through the specifics related to Zowe Explorer for VS Code. So what's new in V3? What can users expect for installation and configuration changes? Will there be any impact to existing user experience? Will there be new capabilities? And then they'll give you a deeper dive into specific features. And we'll conclude with who could you contact if you had any questions. We have that information at the back, and then we'll open it up for general Q&A. Next slide. Excuse me. So important release information. The dates that we want to bring to your attention include the planned V3 GA date, which we mentioned, March 28th. Zowe V1 end of support date is at the end of September this year. That runway is getting shorter and shorter, and we want to encourage all of you to ensure that you have plans to upgrade to V2 as soon as possible. You could also plan to go straight to V3. If you need help in making that decision, please feel free to reach out to any of us. We can certainly have a conversation around that. As far as compatibility goes, it is important to ensure that if you are upgrading to V3, ensure that any extensions that you use are compatible with V3. And the best way to do that is to go to the conformance site at zowe.org and ensure that the extension that you are using has earned their V3 conformance badge. Aside from that, if you do not see that badge, you could contact your vendor who produces that extension and confirm with them that possibly the V2 extension excuse me, is compatible with v3. And as a side note there at the bottom, just for your information, everyone has to reapply for v3 conformance. Everyone has to reaffirm that their extensions are interoperable with v3. But also the conformant support providers, the vendors that claim that they are able to support the current release of Zowe, also need to reapply for conformance in order to ensure that they are able to support all of the core components that are included in Zowe v3. Next slide, please. Just another way of looking at the important dates that we just brought to your attention in sort of a green-blue timeline format. We are here in January. We're presenting office hours for consumers, giving you insights into what's coming with v3. I believe there are technical previews available, but Billy and Adam will talk about that if you're interested in checking out v3 in advance. In the March timeline, we'll introduce v3, but we'll also produce the final active release for v2. So no more new features for v2 after March. And then by May, the first maintenance release for Zowe v2 will be introduced. And then in September, v1 will terminate community support. And with that, I think it's time to go into the Zowe Explorer v3 overview. And who am I going to? Adam?
Yeah, I'll take it from here.
Okay, alrighty.
So thanks, Rose.
Mm-hmm.
Brief overview. What's changing in v3 for Zowe Explorer for VS Code? So in terms of breaking changes, we have removal of v1 profile support, which we'll talk about more in a later slide. We have removal of deprecated Zowe Explorer APIs, changes to storage of persistent user settings, and in terms of new features that'll be available in v3, we have the ability to issue Unix commands from within Zowe Explorer and the ability to compare MVS datasets and Unix files. And we'll go into those in more detail in the next few slides. And before we get into the UX changes and new features, it's good to answer the question, how will users install Zowe Explorer v3? For many users, the extension will be automatically updated in VS Code when the new version is released. However, if you've chosen to install a specific version of Zowe Explorer, you will need to manually update the extension in VS Code. Alternatively, if you don't have Zowe Explorer installed at all, you can find the extension in the VS Code Marketplace by searching for Zowe Explorer, or you can download the extension as a .vsix file from zowe.org, or directly from the Zowe Explorer repository. And as a warning, if you have not implemented a team config and are still using v1 profiles, if Zowe Explorer is set to update automatically, it will need to be updated to, or it will be updated automatically to v3 when v3 is released. And you'll have to either revert to a v2 release or convert to a team config to continue to use Zowe Explorer if you're still using v1 profiles. Now, in terms of configuration, of course, the most significant change from v2 to v3 is that in v3, Zowe v1 profiles are no longer supported. And to clarify, if your Zowe CLI or Explorer profiles are a collection of YAML files, that means you'll need to upgrade to the configuration format introduced in v2, known as team configuration or team config, in order to run Zowe Explorer v3. And you'll know that you have a team config if there is a zoe.config.json file in your Zowe home directory. So for most users, the transition from Zowe Explorer v2 to v3 should be almost unnoticeable. However, it's worth calling out a few changes. First, we have the removal of v1 profile support, which I just talked about. Then we have removal of support for Eclipse Theia. And while Theia is functionally very similar to VS Code, there are enough differences to make it challenging to support both Thea and VS Code, particularly when the vast number of Zowe Explorer users are using VS Code, with roughly 8,000 downloads from the OpenVSX registry, which is used by Thea, and over, I think, 114,000 installs from the VS Code marketplace. And finally, we're claiming support for VS Code engine version 1.79.0 and higher. And in terms of new features available at launch, Zowe V3 will again allow you to compare datasets and USS files and issue Unix commands. And Billy will describe these in more detail later in the presentation. We've also made changes to how we store persistent data with Zowe Explorer by adding support for VS Code's local storage API, also known as Memento. This means that manual changes to certain data in the VS Code settings.json file, in this case we're talking about user history, will not be reflected anymore in Zowe Explorer, and users will instead need to use the right-click menu action to edit history to modify these settings. And the settings include dataset history, USS file history, and jobs history. And with that, I'll hand it over to Billy. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. So to talk in a little bit more detail of features, we just keep, running this one home, the removal of V1 profile support. Users with VS Code installed will need to create a team configuration to manage their profiles using the same process we already have available in V2 during profile creation. It means if you do have V1 profiles and you have an auto update to V3, you will get a message box on the VS Code screen just letting you know that V1 profiles are no longer supported. We do plan to add to that pop-up message and allow users to use the convert capability as an option. There's another way you can update your team configuration if you are a Zowe CLI user as well as the Zowe Explorer for VS Code. They already have a command in place, the Zowe config convert command. And that is the capability we want to bring into the UI experience as well. You can also use commands to create a new config, and with certain permissions, you can use Zowe config auto init if you are also set up to use the Zowe API mediation layer. And what that does is it will autofill some of the information that is available from the Zowe API mediation layer into that new config file. Next slide, please. The next feature I want to talk about is the compare datasets and USS files. This will use the VS Code diff API and allows you to compare two chosen files from MVS and or Unix trees. So you can compare two files from the MVS tree or two files from the USS tree, or you can compare from either tree. You can also compare if you have multiple profiles. You can compare files across different LPARs or, profile access points to different host systems. I have a few screenshots here just showing the experience. Next slide. Another new feature that will go out with GA is the ability to issue Unix commands. We offer this feature through the right-click action on the tree. It looks at the tree where the right-click action is done. That will be the path that will be used. If you decide you want to do something that isn't within the path you have already expanded, we do offer it as well through the command palette. It is the option Zowe Explorer issue Unix command. Okay, some Zowe V3 resources. We have the zoe.org/vnext link. We also have a new and improved Zowe Explorer wiki that you can access that will have a lot of information about releases that are already out there, all changes that are coming to the V3. We do keep our conformance items in there for extenders to look at, as well as our roadmap of predicted features and enhancements we want to bring into the product over the year. We have a link here also to our GitHub releases where you can grab a copy of the V3 pre-release. And then we have a link here for Zowe Explorer issues. If you are testing out the V3 pre-release, feel free to use this issues link to let us know of any problems you run into so we can get it all polished up for you for the GA. All right. I think the final one here before Q&A, we got our contact information. The easiest way to get up with us is the Zowe Explorer VSCE OMP Slack channel. Adam and I both have our LinkedIn shared here, and then our contact information for the OMP Slack. If you want to, tag us in a message to get our attention or send us a direct message. And we've also included our email addresses here if you need to reach out that way. All right, I think that is about it. So are there any questions?
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Billy. I don't see any in the chat. We'll give it another few minutes. And just want to sort of recap what I heard as sort of a key point related to V3, similar to what Adam had described in Zowe CLI. If you are currently running V1 and using V1 profiles, you will have a problem with Zowe Explorer and Zowe CLI V3. And Billy, if I understood correctly, when you download Zowe Explorer V3, did you say that there would be a warning message?
Yeah, we will let users know that we saw that they were still using V1, and it lets them know that, we're not supporting that anymore. And, we plan on add maybe a button there that'll take them right to either creating a config file, which they can do now just using the plus button to add a profile. You get the options to create a profile, which is the V1 option, and then create a team configuration. And those can be created at the global or project level. But so we plan to have try to make the migration as easy as possible to have these notifications to the user so they know why they can't move forward and what they need to do to fix that issue.
Mm-hmm. And there'll also be an option, I guess, to revert.
That would be almost at the marketplace level. You would go to where your extensions are installed. You can click on it, and then at the uninstall, I think there's a drop down, and you can choose to install a different version number, so you can roll back.
Okay. And the message that we're planning to deliver to the consumer will indicate those two options?
No, the message we're delivering is the options will be to create a new team config, or we're planning to have an option to convert their V1 profiles into a team config.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, just before we close out, that final slide is sort of a call to action to any of you who have not subscribed to the OMP user mailing list. If you're interested in subscribing to that, the Zowe-user mailing list, the link to joining that list, in addition to being here, if you're interested in downloading the presentation once we post it, it's also available at zowe.org right at the announcement line. You just click on that link and fill out the form, subscribe. That gives us the ability to reach out to all of you directly versus having to come into Zowe.org or the Slack channels, etc., to learn about important information. So just want to encourage you all to be on that mailing list. Okay. Do not see any questions. So I will thank our presenters, Billy and Adam. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Look for the recording. Probably, we try to get them out there as soon as possible, but they may not be there until next week. And certainly reach out to any of us if you have any questions